This is Dominicimo Voxlore, transmitting on channels lit by the forged fires of Prometheus, carried upon signals tempered in flame and steel. In this broadcast, we chart the Salamanders, the sons of Vulkan, born of Nocturne's fire, guardians of mankind, and bearers of the eternal flame. From the inferno of Isstvan V, where betrayal sought their extinction, to the rebirth of their creed upon Nocturne, to the burning crucible of Armageddon and the unending wars of the Dark Imperium. This is the saga of a chapter that endures through compassion, sacrifice, and fire. Strike the seal of subscription and join the ranks of those who carry the flame of Vulkan. Steel your will, guard the weak, and bear witness to the fire that never dies. This is the voice of Dominicimo, and this is the lore of the Salamanders. The earliest days of the Salamanders saga stretch into the mists of humanity's age of unification, long before the Great Crusade. In those times, the legion what would become the Salamanders was known only by a whispered title, the Dragon Warriors, a name rarely spoken, yet steeped in mystery. Their first truly recorded act of heroism came during the assault on the Tempest Galleries, a desperate clash in the waning days of Terra's unification wars. The enemy was the Ethnarchy, a cabal of techno-barbarian warlords wielding relic weapons from the dark age of technology, entrenched in subterranean strongholds beneath the Caucasus Mountains. Their defences included ancient automata, power fields, and mechanisms that defied standard weaponry. The Emperor marshalled forces from 6 proto-legions and the Custodes, alongside infantry armies, to break this final bastion of resistance. But in that moment, he entrusted the fiercest burden to the Dragon Warriors, to spearhead the strike into the heart of the Ethnarchy's generator cores. 20,000 legionaries set forth, many would never return. The automata were impervious to bolters, melters, and plasma. Wave after wave of machine guardians fell upon the legion's ranks. As one historian put it, almost 4/5 of the task force survived the dangerous journey underground. They were confronted by ancient automated sentry guards. Thousands of these automatons deployed against the 18th. The cost was staggering. By the time the final generator fell, the Dragon Warriors had been battered from 20,000 to around 1,000 survivors. But in that crucible, they conquered. The Ethnarchy was taken prisoner, his holds broken, and the bastion of Terra's north stood cleansed. That victory, so costly, so desperate, became symbolic. It became the lens through which the future generations would see the Salamanders. Warriors forged in sacrifice, carrying the burden of protecting mankind, even at great cost. In the battle's aftermath, the Legion was depleted to a skeleton of itself. Though they would rebuild, their losses lingered. The tsunami of casualties meant for much of the Great Crusade, the Salamanders were used in piecemeal squads or assigned to emergencies, rather than large-scale offensives. Their reputation as specialists in impossible tasks, especially those involving heat, flame and volcanoes, or desperate last stands, began to take shape. Yet even then, their bond to the world of Nocturne was blossoming. The dragon imagery, the affinity for molten fire and volcanic strength, the deep sense of duty to protect weaker humanity, these themes emerged early, even if not yet fully formed. Over time, the Dragon Warriors would be united with their lost Primarch Vulkan on Nocturne, and from that union, the name Salamanders would be born. We see the crucible that defined them, the sacrifice of thousands, the glory of daring beyond limits, and the forging of an identity through fire and suffering. The Dragon Warriors entered the galactic stage in smoke and steel, and from their ashes, the Salamanders would one day rise. The Great Crusade was a firestorm across the stars, and for the 18th Legion it was the proving ground upon which they would forge their enduring character. When the Emperor strode out into the void to reunite mankind, the Salamanders were no longer just the broken remnants of the Dragon Warriors who had bled in the Tempest Galleries. They had been reforged into a legion, bolstered by fresh gene seed stock and newly raised recruits. Though their numbers were never as vast as the Ultramarines or Imperial Fists, their deeds quickly marked them as warriors of unyielding resolve. The Salamanders became renowned as masters of close-range warfare. Their war doctrine emphasised the thunder of bolters, the roar of flamers, and the crushing might of heavy hammers. They did not sweep aside enemies with vast tides of manpower. Instead, they struck as tempered steel, methodical, devastating, and relentless. Their advance was always deliberate, their heavy armour and fire support moving in lockstep with infantry. What they lacked in speed, they more than compensated with unstoppable force. Throughout the Crusade, the Legion was often chosen for campaigns where the Emperor's enemies clung to fortified redoubts or entrenched themselves behind impossible defences. No Citadel of Solone, no alien hive nest, no steel bastion endured long once the Salamanders set their forges against it. Where another legion might shy from sieges or the attritional grind of urban combat, the Salamanders embraced the trial. To them, such wars mirrored the volcanic reality of their gene-sized homeworld, where brutal survival itself was a battle against fire and earth. Among their most celebrated engagements was the battle for the world of Coratan, a planet dominated by immense orc war fortresses. Here, the Salamanders demonstrated their unique ferocity. While other Imperial forces battered themselves against the orc bulwarks for weeks, the 18th deployed heavy melter formations and flame-belching support units, carving through thick ferrocrete walls as though they were wax before a torch. Entire orc armies were incinerated in their bunkers, reduced to ash in a storm of flame. Caratan's conquest became legend, a tale retold in Legion halls as proof of the Emperor's trust in their capabilities. Their Primarch had not yet been found, but even without Vulkan, the Salamanders were already beginning to resemble him. They fought not as aloof angels of death, but as warriors deeply conscious of the mortals they defended. Records tell of the 18th Legion's habit of constructing relief shelters and distributing supplies after planetary pacifications. Unlike many of their brother legions, they did not vanish back into orbit the moment victory was declared. They lingered long enough to ensure stability, offering their protection until Imperial governors could take root. Such deeds earned them admiration among Imperial army regiments and newly compliant citizens alike. To many common soldiers, the Salamanders became the ideal vision of what the Emperor's son should be, protectors as well as destroyers. One campaign stands out as an early turning point, the War for Sarkis III, a forge world consumed by civil strife. Rebel tech guilds had seized vast manufactoria and turned their guns against Imperial reinforcements. The Salamanders were deployed in the vanguard, fighting amidst foundries and magma-fed smelters. The 18th pushed through conditions of choking heat and toxic fumes that would have crippled other warriors. The Legion's ability to endure extremes, a gift of their physiology, turned the battlefield itself into their ally. In the end, the rebels were purged, and Sarkis III was brought into compliance. But what marked the war was not just victory, it was the Salamanders' effort to save civilian labour guilds caught between the warring factions. Entire worker populations were evacuated from burning smelters under the protection of Salamanders' fire teams. To the forge clans of Sarkis III, these giants of obsidian armour were saviours, not executioners. This ethos of compassion was already shaping the Legion before Vulkan ever set his eyes on his sons. It was a rare distinction, for most other legions at the time were grimly utilitarian in their wars. The Iron Hands crushed weakness, the Night Lords ruled by terror, and even the stoic Imperial Fist viewed collateral suffering as an acceptable cost. The Salamanders, by contrast, carried a very different creed. Humanity was not just to be ruled, it was to be protected. The Great Crusade also saw the Salamanders hone their gift for craftsmanship. On campaign, they became famed artificers, forging weapons of unparalleled quality in the heat of their mobile forges. No other legion produced so many master-crafted arms, each engraved with motifs of flame and dragon iconography. These were not merely tools of war, but symbols, a belief that every weapon was a sacred responsibility, an extension of the warrior's duty. Even in those early centuries, a Salamander's bolt or a hammer was prized by allies who knew the craft of the 18th was second to none. The Salamanders' campaigns were not without terrible cost. They were never among the most numerous of legions, and attrition in the meat grinders of the Great Crusade steadily wore at their strength. Yet time and again, they held fast. On the industrial ward of Gorstagrand, it is said that 19,000 Salamanders held against millions of orcs, fighting through years of brutal conflict. By the end, their numbers had been whittled down to a handful of thousands, yet their will remained unbroken. It was during this campaign that Vulkan himself, newly discovered on Nocturne, would eventually arrive to reinforce them. But that meeting belongs to another tale. What matters here is the image the Salamanders etched into history, a force that refused to die, no matter the odds. Through the long years of the Great Crusade, the Salamanders built a reputation of reliability, loyalty, and sheer bloody determination. They were never the Emperor's fastest blade, nor his largest hammer, but they were the tool he turned to when no other could endure. When impossible sieges had to be broken, when Xenos infestations required total annihilation, or when worlds needed not just conquest but protection, the 18th were called. By the time the Emperor's wandering sons began to be rediscovered, the Salamanders had already carved a legacy of fire and stone. They were scarred, scarcer in number than many of their kin, but tempered by the heat of countless battlefields. Every forge world they brought into compliance, every hive city they saved from collapse, Every Orc war fortress they burned to embers added another link to the chain of honour that would define them forever. And so, when Vulkan at last emerged from the volcanic world of Nocturne to take his place as their Primarch, he did not find an unshaped legion. He found warriors already moulded by hardship, already guided by an innate sense of humanity, and already wielding flame as their eternal weapon. What he gave them was not a new soul, but recognition, a leader worthy of sons who had already become his mirror in war. The Horus Heresy was the galaxy's darkest hour, and for the Salamanders, it was the crucible that would break them more completely than any other legion. The betrayal at Isstvan V did not just shatter their ranks, it came close to wiping them from existence altogether. When Horus declared his treachery, the Salamanders were among the legions called to answer. Alongside the Iron Hands and Raven Guard, they were summoned to the blackened plains of Isstvan V, ordered to bring the War Master and his corrupted sons to justice. 7 legions were mustered for the assault, but 4 of them, the Iron Warriors, the Night Lords, the Alpha Legion, and the Word Bearers, had already secretly cast their lot with Horus. The plan was a trap, one of the greatest betrayals in the history of the Imperium. The Salamanders formed part of the first wave, their companies marching into the Ash Way shoulder to shoulder with the Iron Hands and Raven Guard. Vulkan himself strode at their head, a giant of obsidian skin and draconic eyes, wielding the hammer that bore the fire of Nocturne's forges. At first, the battle seemed to go in their favour. Loyalist forces smashed into the traitors' fortifications, bolters roaring and flamers turning trenches into burning pits. The Salamanders advanced with their typical methodical determination, driving deeper into the blackened soil of Isstvan. But then the trap was sprung. The traitor legions, who had feigned loyalty, turned their guns on their supposed allies. The Iron Warriors unleashed their artillery into the backs of their erstwhile comrades. The Night Lords and Word Bearers fell upon the Salamanders with chainswords and bolters, and the Alpha Legion cut off avenues of retreat. The Loyalists were caught in a vice, annihilated from front and rear. For the Salamanders, the slaughter was apocalyptic. Whole companies were swallowed in barrages of virus bombs and cyclonic detonations. Even the genetic resilience of Vulkan's sons, their thickened coal-black skin, able to shrug off heat and radiation, was no protection against the scale of destruction unleashed that day. The Ash Plains became a sea of fire and death. Legends speak of the Salamanders fighting to the last man, never breaking ranks even as they were scythed down. They refused to flee, forming tight phalanxes around their captains, bolters spitting defiance until ammunition ran dry. Some units fought on with blades and hammers, their armour scorched and broken, until they were crushed beneath waves of traitor fire. At the heart of the maelstrom was Vulkan. The Primarch led counterattacks against impossible odds, rallying his sons again and again. It is said that whenever his hammer fell, traitor lines buckled, but even he could not turn the tide. Vulkan was eventually struck down during the battle, overwhelmed in a storm of firepower that might have killed any other Primarch outright. His body was seized by the Night Lords, and in the chaos of the retreat, the Salamanders believed their father lost forever. By the battle's end, the 18th Legion had been all but annihilated. Of the tens of thousands who had descended to Isstvan, only a scattering of survivors made it back to orbit. The Loyalist fleet itself was shattered, and the remnants that escaped carried with them little more than ashes and grief. The Salamanders, once counted among the Emperor's trusted sons, were reduced to a fraction of their former strength. But their trials did not end with the massacre, for Vulkan was not dead. Unknown to his sons, he had survived through the unique nature of his being, a perpetual, unable to truly die. Captured by the Night Haunter, Conrad Kurz, Vulkan was dragged through a nightmare of torment. The Night Lord's Primarch subjected him to endless cycles of death and resurrection, seeking to break him. But Vulkan endured. Again and again, he was burned, broken and butchered, and again, he returned. His suffering became legend, a tale whispered of a father who could not die, no matter the cruelty inflicted upon him. While Vulkan languished in captivity, the survivors of Isstvan clung to one another. First Captain Artellus Numion led what fragments he could gather, bearing what he believed to be the corpse of their Primarch. Their escape from Isstvan was harrowing, their numbers dwindling further with each clash against traitor fleets. In the void between the stars, Numion swore he would return Vulkan's body to Nocturne, no matter the cost. His oath carried the remnants of the Legion across the burning length of the heresy, pursued and hounded, but never breaking faith. The Salamanders' near destruction had profound consequences. Unlike many of their brother legions, they played little part in the later great campaigns of the heresy. They were simply too few, scattered and broken. While the Ultramarines fought on Calth and the Imperial Fist built the defence of Terra, the Salamanders licked their wounds in hidden refuges, rebuilding what little they could from the survivors. For some, this was a source of bitterness. They had been denied their vengeance, denied the chance to repay Horus and his traitors for the betrayal on Isstvan. Yet even in their weakness, the Salamanders held true to their creed. Survivors who returned to Nocturne did not abandon their people. They defended their homeworld, stood guard over the tribes, and maintained their ancient traditions of service. Unlike many legions who drifted into aloof isolation, the Salamanders never ceased to see themselves as part of humanity rather than above it. This bond to their world and their people would prove the foundation for their survival long after the heresy ended. The inferno of Isstvan V remains the single darkest moment in the Salamanders' history. Few other legions were so utterly broken in one stroke. The Iron Hands lost their Primarch, Ferrus Manus, that day. The Raven Guard were butchered almost to extinction, but the Salamanders' suffering was unique. They lost not just their numbers, but their leader, and were left scattered across a galaxy in flames. Yet from the furnace of that betrayal, their identity hardened. They became the legion that would not yield, the sons who carried their father's flame even in his absence. The heresy raged on, but for the Salamanders, it became less a war of conquest and more a struggle for survival. Every surviving company, every fragmentary fleet, fought simply to endure. And though they were denied the glory of great victories in the heresy's climactic battles, their sacrifice on Isstvan became immortal. It was the price they paid to show the galaxy what loyalty truly meant. A loyalty written not in words, but in the blood and fire on the blackened soil of a dead world. When the fires of the Horus Heresy finally gutted out, the galaxy was left in ruins. Terror itself lay half shattered by siege, its walls blackened by bombardment, its emperor entombed within the Golden Throne. For the Salamanders, the end of the war brought not triumph but quiet endurance. Their legion had been bled nearly to extinction on Isstvan V, their Primarch Vulkan vanished into myth, and their scattered survivors faced a future of uncertainty. Yet, where many would have faltered, the Salamanders chose to endure. Their ordeal had been one of the most severe of any loyalist force. Entire battalions of the 18th were wiped out during the Dropsite Massacre, and those who escaped did so only as tattered remnants of once proud companies. Under the leadership of officers like First Captain Artelius Numion, they had carried what they believed to be the Primarch's corpse across the stars, enduring a punishing odyssey that saw many more fall in battle against traitor fleets and marauders. Though Numion himself would perish before reaching Nocturne, his vow to honour Vulkan's legacy lived on among the survivors. The Salamanders that gathered on Nocturne in the years after the heresy were few. It is said that only 7 companies remained intact enough to bear arms, their numbers dwarfed by the vast hosts of other legions. But scarcity did not mean weakness. From their volcanic homeland, the Salamanders began to reforge themselves. Unlike many of their brother legions, who withdrew into their fortress monasteries or become aloof lords over their subjects, the Salamanders rebuilt hand in hand with their people. Nocturne itself had always been a world of fire and hardship. Its unstable orbit, locked in a deadly dance with the massive gas giant Prometheus, unleashed constant tectonic upheavals, volcanic eruptions, and seasons of devastating predation by the titanic beast that roamed its wastes. For the tribes of Nocturne, survival was daily war. For the Salamanders, who were born of those tribes, it was home. Reconstruction began not only in the fortress forges of Prometheus, the moon that served as their primary bastion, but also in the hearts of Nocturne settlements. The surviving Astartes trained new generations drawn from the tribes, reforging their numbers slowly, methodically, with a care for quality rather than speed. In this they reflected the ideals Vulkan had instilled in them. Every warrior was a weapon carefully tempered, every life a flame to be protected, not squandered. Their reorganisation took on a unique character. While other legions fractured into successor chapters during the second founding under Rabuti Guilliman's Codex Astartes, the Salamanders resisted division. They had always been small by comparison, and their bond to Nocturne was too strong to scatter. Rather than create many successor chapters, they retained their unity as a single chapter, one that maintained the traditions of their lost Primarch. It was here that the 7-company structure, reflecting the 7 great tribes of Nocturne, was enshrined. Each company became a living bond to one of the tribes, and each Forge Father, or Forge Priest, maintained the sacred art of crafting the weapons and relics that gave the Salamanders their identity. This structure was not just symbolic, it kept the Salamanders tied to the people they defended. Off-duty battle brothers returned to their tribes, walking among their kin as protectors, mentors, and leaders. For the Salamanders, there was no division between Astartes and mortal. They were the same people, the same bloodline, one tempered in the forge of war, the others in the fires of survival. It was a closeness unique among the legions, and it endured into the new age of the Imperium. The memory of Vulkan also endured. Though he had vanished after the heresy, his teachings were preserved in the Promethean Cult, a warrior creed that guided every salamander. The cult emphasised self-sacrifice, the protection of the weak, and the tempering of strength through trial. It taught that fire was not only a weapon, but a purifying force, burning away weakness and revealing the strength beneath. The philosophy shaped every aspect of the Salamanders' culture, their weapons, their strategy, their role as guardians. Even in Vulkan's absence, it was though his spirit lived on in every forged fire and every act of compassion toward humanity. Still, the post-heresy years were not gentle. The Imperium entered the long and brutal era known as the Scouring. Loyalist forces hunted down retreating traitor legions, driving them into the Eye of Terror. The Salamanders, weakened though they were, did not abstain. Their companies joined in many of the purges, lending their flame and hammer to the destruction of traitor redoubts and the burning of corrupted strongholds. Records tell of Salamander strike forces fighting alongside Ultramarines to cleanse heretic enclaves, and of campaigns waged against world-bearer cults on distant frontier worlds. But unlike some of their vengeful brothers, the Salamanders never lost sight of their core creed. Where others sought only the extermination of enemies, they sought also to preserve what could be saved. In the ruins of cities torn apart by war, Salamanders built shelters for refugees. When Xenos mercenaries were purged, they escorted human slaves to safety. This balance of flame and mercy became their hallmark, setting them apart in an age when much of the Imperium's fury was blind and indiscriminate. It was also during this period that the Salamanders' legend of endurance deepened. Though their numbers were never restored to the tens of thousands, the chapter survived and adapted. Their forges on Prometheus produced mastercrafted relics of such artistry that other chapters coveted them. Yet the Salamanders kept most of their creations close, viewing them as sacred heirlooms of their people. Every thunderhammer, every flamer, every piece of armour was not just a tool of war but a symbol of the chapter's bond with Nocturne's volcanic heat. The centuries after the heresy were also marked by their determination to keep Vulkan's legacy alive. Rumours persisted that their Primarch had survived, that his body never truly perished. Some whispered that he still walked the galaxy, a perpetual guardian who could not die. Others claimed that he had left trials, hidden relics, artifacts of power, that his sons must one day recover. Whether myth or truth, these beliefs gave the Salamanders a sense of destiny. They were not merely a chapter among many, they were the keepers of their father's flame, awaiting the day of his return. By the dawn of the 31st millennium, the Salamanders had emerged from the ashes of betrayal and near-annihilation. They were no longer a legion, but they were unbroken. Their 7 companies stood as living reflections of Nocturne's tribes. Their Promethean creed gave them purpose, and their devotion to humanity kept them closer to the Emperor's dream than most of their kin. The Imperium they now defended was darker, harsher, and far more ruthless than the one they had fought to build during the Great Crusade. But the Salamanders, tempered in fire and hardened by loss, chose a different path. Where others ruled by fear, they led by example. Where others demanded sacrifice, they gave it freely. From the embers of Isstvan and the heresy's ruin, they had reforged themselves into a chapter that embodied the very ideals of strength, sacrifice, and compassion that Vulkan had once taught. In a galaxy scarred by betrayal, the Salamanders emerged not as broken survivors, but as guardians, the living flame of a Primarch who would not be forgotten. In the long shadow cast by the Horus Heresy, the Imperium hardened into something colder and less forgiving. The Emperor's dream of unity was transfigured into an empire of survival at all costs. The High Lords of Terror demanded sacrifice upon sacrifice, and the legions that had become chapters under the Codex Astartes carried out their wars with ruthless efficiency. For most, humanity was no longer a people to be nurtured, but a resource to be consumed in the defence of the Imperium's crumbling frontiers. The Salamanders were different. Among the Astartes, theirs was a creed that stood almost alone. While the Space Marines were engineered to be angels of death, the Salamanders chose to remain guardians first and foremost. They believed that their power was given not to rule over mankind, but to protect it. This conviction, born of Vulkan's teachings and rooted in Nocturne's tribal traditions, set them apart in a galaxy that had grown indifferent to the value of a single human life. Unlike other chapters, the Salamanders lived closely among their people. When they were not called to war, they returned to the volcanic settlements of Nocturne, dwelling alongside the same tribes from which they were recruited. They built homes, tended forges, and stood as protectors in times of hardship. In their eyes, the bond between Astartes and mortal was sacred, a family bond, not to be broken by transformation into a warrior. The Salamanders never forgot that they had once been human, and in that remembrance lay their strength. This compassion did not make them weak. On the contrary, it tempered their resolve. In battle, Salamanders fought with an intensity born not from loyalty to the Imperium, but from the knowledge that every life saved was precious. They were known to risk their own survival, even to endanger the success of a mission if it meant protecting the innocent. To other chapters this seemed reckless. To the Salamanders, it was their duty. Campaign records tell of the purging of Elysia, where Salamanders' forces were dispatched to cleanse a world consumed by heresy. During the fighting, entire cities became death traps, their populations caught between chaos cults and imperial bombardments. Where other chapters might have reduced the settlements to ash and declared victory, the Salamanders waded into the chaos, shielding civilians behind their own armour and carving evacuation routes through fire and blood. Tens of thousands survived who otherwise would have perished, and though the Salamanders paid heavily in casualties, their actions left an indelible mark upon Imperial history. The ethos of protection also shaped their doctrine of war. The Salamanders favoured short-range engagements, where their bolters, melters and flamers could be brought to bear at maximum effect. Their weapons were not tools only for destruction but of control, clearing corridors for retreat, burning out entrenched threats before they could endanger allies, and forcing enemy hordes to scatter so that civilians could be withdrawn from danger. Their mastery of flame was not wanton or indiscriminate. It was precise, a craftsman's art applied with both fury and care. That craftsmanship was itself a reflection of their creed. The Salamanders' forges on Prometheus produced some of the finest weapons and armour in the Imperium, yet these were not made for glory or ostentation. They were crafted as acts of devotion. Every flamer, every thunderhammer, every blade was a labour of love, imbued with meaning and responsibility. In this way, the Salamanders carried Vulkan's lessons forward. A weapon is not just a tool of death, but a trust, a symbol of the bond between warrior and those he defends. Stories abound of Salamanders who carried this creed beyond the battlefield. One famed account describes a captain of the chapter who, after a campaign against the Orcs, remained on the liberated world for months, helping rebuild the settlement's defences and teaching smithcraft to the survivors. To the Salamanders, such acts were not beneath them, they were essential. Just as the forge reforges broken metal into something anew, so too did the Salamanders see their role as reforging broken worlds into strength again. This philosophy sometimes put them at odds with their brother chapters. The Black Templars, with their zealous disdain for weakness, viewed the Salamanders' compassion as indulgence. The Iron Hands, who believed in purging frailty through steel, considered their approach sentimental. Even the Ultramarines, who valued order and compliance above all, sometimes criticised the Salamanders for risking broader objectives in order to save civilians. Yet the Salamanders remained unshaken. They had nearly been destroyed at Isstvan, had endured centuries of hardship, and through it all they held fast to the one truth they believed mattered. Humanity was worth saving, no matter the cost. On Nocturne itself, this belief was embodied in the rituals of the Trial of Fire. Young aspirants drawn from the trials were subjected not only to the physical rigours of transformation into Astartes, but to trials designed to test their willingness to sacrifice for others. Many would walk into the burning deserts of the planet, carrying nothing but a simple tool, tasked not with survival alone but with saving a fellow tribesman. Only those who returned with both lives intact were deemed worthy. Through these rites, the Salamanders ensured that every recruit carried their creed within him from the very beginning. The bond to Nocturne also deepened their sense of responsibility. The planet was perilous in the extreme, racked by earthquakes, lava flows, and the predations of colossal salamanders and drakes. The tribes lived in constant danger, and the Salamanders were their shield. Whenever disaster struck, when a volcano erupted near a settlement, when a firestorm swept across the plains, it was often the Astartes who arrived first, braving the cataclysm to lead survivors to safety. To live among their people was to never forget the value of life, and that memory gave their wars across the stars a human weight that many chapters had long abandoned. Over time, this reputation spread. Imperial Guard regiments who fought alongside the Salamanders recorded stories of Astartes carrying wounded soldiers to safety under fire, or halting in advance to rescue trapped civilians. To the common soldiery of the Imperium, these were not just warriors of the Emperor, they were saviours. Among the billions of citizens who would never meet a Space Marine, the Salamanders became the subject of whispered prayers and grateful songs, proof that not all of the Emperor's sons had forgotten the people for whom they fought. And yet, compassion did not make them any less lethal. The Salamanders remain one of the most feared chapters in close quarters. Their mastery of fire was absolute, their ability to endure extremes unmatched, and their relentless courage unshakable. They were guardians, yes, but guardians with hammers that could shatter fortresses and flames that could scour worlds clean of corruption. The Imperium of Man in the 31st and 32nd millennia was becoming a harsher, more merciless empire, one that demanded sacrifice without end. But the Salamanders' creed stood as a flickering light in that darkness, a reminder of what had once been dreamed in the Great Crusade and what could still be preserved. They were forged in compassion, tempered in sacrifice, and unyielding in their devotion to humanity. In a galaxy that had all but forgotten mercy, they carried it still, as faithfully as they carried their bolters and hammers. The galaxy has always been hostile to mankind. From the orc hordes that swept across the stars to the endless incursions of chaos, humanity was never short of enemies. Yet some threats were more insidious, more unrelenting than others. For the Salamanders, their long vigil brought them into frequent contact with two such terrors: their ever-evolving Tyranids and the deathless legions of the Necrons. Against both, the Salamanders fought with the same unwavering determination: fire against the swarm and flame against the eternal cold of the tomb. One of their most storied clashes with the Tyranids came in the Imgal campaign, when the Salamanders' second company was deployed to the system to eliminate a genestealer infestation. The Imgal strain was infamous, the first documented genestealers ever encountered by humanity, capable of mutating their forms to overcome whatever resistance they faced. The campaign dragged on for nearly 2 years, each moon of the Imgal system infested with swarms of aberrant hybrids. The Salamanders prosecuted the war methodically, purging one moon at a time. The fighting was brutal, fought in twisting caverns where the Tyranids' chameleon adaptations and ambush tactics tested even the keen instincts of the Astartes. But the Salamanders had the advantage of patience and relentless persistence. They sealed tunnel mouths with Promethean fire, collapsed hive nests with melter charges, and pressed their advance step by step, never rushing, never yielding. In the end, the infestation was annihilated, and the Imgal strain was thought extinct, at least for a time. The campaign showcased the Salamanders' resilience against an enemy designed to overwhelm, proving that discipline and fire could hold even against the hive mind's endless hunger. But the Tyranids were not a foe easily contained. Centuries later, as hive fleets began their full assault on the galaxy, the Salamanders would be drawn into the shadow of Leviathan, Kraken, and their countless tendrils. Time and again they deployed to worlds on the brink of annihilation, forming rearguards to protect Imperial Guard regiments during evacuations, or spearheading counterattacks to destroy synapse creatures and disrupt the swarm. What set them apart was not just their skill in war, but their refusal to abandon the populations of besieged worlds. Where other chapters saw a doomed planet and cut their losses, the Salamanders fought until every transport was filled, every shelter cleared. Against an enemy that viewed humanity as nothing more than biomass, the Salamanders stood as shields of flesh and fire. If the Tyranids embodied the endless hunger of life gone mad, the Necrons represented the other extreme, the cold, silent inevitability of death. The Salamanders' most famous clash with these ancient machines came at the Siege of Zaros. The Necrons had risen from their tombs in force, spilling their undying legions across the surface of the world. For nearly 100 days the Salamanders fought alongside the Astra Militarum, their flame and melter weapons tested against enemies who did not burn, did not bleed, and did not fear. The battles on Zaros were some of the most punishing the Salamanders had ever endured. Entire cities were reduced to battlefields of grinding attrition, with phalanxes of Necron warriors advancing inexorably under withering gorse fire. Against such enemies, even the Salamanders' renowned close-range firepower was challenged. Flame that could turn orc to ash was nothing but light against living metal. Only concentrated melter blasts and the hammer strikes of Terminator elites could bring the Xenos low, and even then, many simply reanimated, rising again and again to continue the slaughter. It was in this crucible that the Salamanders' endurance was proven once again. They fought side by side with the mortal soldiers of the Imperium, shielding them from gore storms, buying time for artillery to reload, carrying wounded troopers to safety even through the thick of combat. As the siege dragged on, morale among the guard began to falter. Yet the presence of the Salamanders, their stoic determination, their refusal to yield even a single street, inspired the defenders to hold. The climax came when the Salamanders led a final strike against the Necron overlord Amarok. The campaign had reached a point of desperation. Unless the enemy command structure was broken, the world would fall. A strike force of Salamanders Terminators, supported by heavy flamers and melter squads, pushed through the Necron lines in a brutal assault. The fighting was savage and costly, but at last, Amarok was brought down, his body shattered under the hammer blows of the Salamanders' finest. With his destruction, the cohesion of the Necron assault collapsed. The Deathless Legions, robbed of their overlord's will, faltered long enough for Imperial forces to rally and drive them back into their tombs. The siege of Zaros ended in victory, but the cost was high. Salamander's casualties numbered in the hundreds, and thousands of Imperial guardsmen lay dead. Yet the world endured, and its people lived on. In that survival, the Salamanders found vindication. Against enemies who embodied the extremes of alien terror, the swarm that devoured and the machine that endured, the Salamanders had proven that humanity's fire still burned. These campaigns were more than simple battles. They revealed the Salamanders' defining character when faced with Xenos threats. For many other chapters, the war against aliens was one of extermination alone, the foe to be burned, the world written off as lost, the mission judged solely on the enemy dead. For the Salamanders, it was always more. Every civilian evacuated, every guard regiment that survived to fight another day, every world that endured. These were victories as great as the slaying of a Xenos warlord. Their compassion often made their wars more costly. They lingered longer than prudence dictated, fought harder than strategy demanded, and bled more than logic required. But in doing so, they carved a reputation that echoed across the Imperium. Among the mortal soldiery, tales spread of Salamanders who would not abandon them, who would hold the line until the last evac shuttle lifted off, who would charge into impossible odds if it meant saving even a handful of lives. In an empire where human lives were often spent like ammunition, the Salamanders' loyalty to the common man made them heroes not only in battle, but in the hearts of those they defended. The wars against the Tyranids and the Necrons highlighted a truth at the heart of the chapter. The Salamanders were not defined by the enemies they faced, but by how they chose to fight them. Whether it was hunger of the swarm or the silence of the tomb, the Salamanders answered with fire, endurance, and humanity. To the Imperium, they were the angels of death. To the people they saved, they were something more, proof that even in the galaxy filled with nightmares, they were still giants who remembered the worth of a single human life. Few worlds in the Imperium have known war as bitter, as catastrophic, or as unending as Armageddon. A vital industrial hub, its forged cities and hives fed the Imperial war machine with weapons and supplies, making it a prize no Xenos warlord could resist. For the Salamanders, the wars that raged across its blasted surface would become defining moments, their actions etched into Imperial memory as the deeds of guardians who stood unbroken against the tide. The Second War for Armageddon erupted when Ghazghkull Mag-Ug Thraka, the greatest Orc warlord of the age, descended upon the planet with a war of unprecedented scale. Billions of greenskins poured from orbit, their crude war engines and gargantuan fortresses crashing onto the ash wastes. Entire hives fell in the first days, and the defenders of Armageddon were driven back in chaos. Into this storm came the Salamanders, led by Chapter Master Tushan. Unlike many of his peers, Tushan was not a figure of lofty detachment, but a warrior of deep humility and conviction. His leadership would come to embody the Salamander's ethos, to save lives even when victory seemed impossible. The Salamanders were assigned to critical defence operations around Hive Hell's Reach and the River Styges. One of their most famous stands came at the Styges Bridge, the only viable crossing for miles across the chasm that split the Hive's approaches. Waves of orcs hurled themselves at the Salamander's position, swarming with trucks, warbikes and stompers cobbled together with scavenged metal. The Salamanders met them with bolters, flamers and melter fire, turning the bridge into charnel ground of burning wreckage and corpses. Hour after hour the greenskins pressed forward, heedless of losses, but the Salamanders did not yield. Their heavy weapons cut down Orc war engines, their Terminators fought amidst the girders and rubble, and their Devastators poured disciplined fire into the heart of the Horde. By the end of the engagement, the bridge was piled with wreckage and bodies, and the Orc assault was broken. The Salamanders had held, preventing the enemy sweeping into Hell's Reach and saving countless Imperial lives. Another moment of renown came at the defence of Hive Tempestora's water purification plants. Ghazghkull's orcs targeted the facility in an attempt to poison or seize the Hive's only clean water supply. The Salamanders, outnumbered and outgunned, entrenched themselves around the purifiers. For days they fought, repelling attack after attack, often engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat as orcs smashed into their lines. Their determination held the vital plants until reinforcements could arrive, preserving the Hive's survival. In these battles, the Salamanders' ethos shone as brightly as their flamers. Reports from Imperial Guard units describe Salamanders carrying wounded guardsmen to safety under fire, or standing firm to cover civilian evacuations despite overwhelming odds. For the mortal soldiers of Armageddon, their presence was more than military might, it was a beacon of hope. The Second War ended in a stalemate, with Ghazghkull retreating to fight another day. But for the Salamanders, it was a victory of principle. They had safeguarded hives, saved populations, and shown the Imperium what it meant to stand for humanity. Decades later, when the Third War for Armageddon erupted, the Salamanders were among the first chapters to respond. Ghazghkull returned with an even greater war, plunging Armageddon into fire once more. Tushan, now a veteran of the Second War, marshalled 6 companies of Salamanders and deployed them to reinforce the shattered Imperial defences. This time, the Salamanders fought alongside dozens of chapters, including the Ultramarines, Black Templars and Blood Angels. Yet even in such company, their actions stood out. Tushan personally directed operations across multiple war zones, coordinating with Astra Militarum commanders to ensure that not only victories were won, but the civilian population was given every chance to survive. His compassion was not weakness, but strength, a leadership that inspired both Astartes and mortals alike. During the siege of High Vulcanus, Salamander forces fought through weeks of relentless urban warfare, burning orcs out of hab blocks and Manufactura one street at a time. Their flamers turned choke points into barriers of fire, while their melter squads tore through orc war machines that prowled the ruins. When the Hive's outer defences were breached, Tushan led the counter-attack himself, driving the Greenskins back with hammer and flame. Elsewhere, Salamander's companies fought in the Ash Wastes, ambushing orc convoys, torching supply routes, and destroying mech workshops that churned out Stompers and Gargants. Their methodical, relentless approach made them invaluable in a war where every advance had to be measured in blood. What truly set them apart, however, was their commitment to Armageddon's people. Even in the thick of the war, Salamander's squads were seen escorting columns of refugees to safety, or fortifying shelters to withstand orc assaults. Tushan made it clear though that no Salamander would abandon civilians if there was still a chance to save them. This ethos often meant that Salamanders fought longer and harder than strategy demanded, but their actions preserved entire populations that might otherwise have been written off. The price was heavy. Salamander's casualties mounted across the campaigns, their companies reduced by ceaseless attrition. But they endured, because endurance was their way. In the end, the Third War for Armageddon did not end with victory. Ghazghkull escaped once more, his war scattered but not destroyed. The Imperium held the world, but at staggering cost. For the Salamanders though, the legacy was not measured in enemy corpses, but in lives saved. The wars for Armageddon crystallised the chapter's identity in the eyes of the wider Imperium. To many commanders, they were reliable shock troops, unyielding in defence and devastating in close-range war. To the soldiers and civilians who fought alongside them, they were saviours, giants in green armour who stood as bulwarks against annihilation. In the years that followed, the name of the Salamanders was spoken with reverence across Armageddon. Veterans told stories of Astartes shielding them from orc fire, of warriors who carried them from burning ruins, of a chapter that retreated them not as expendable pawns, but as people worth saving. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, such tales were rare, but they burned brighter than any flame. The Salamanders had been tempered in the fire of Armageddon. Against the endless orc tide, they had proven their creed once again, to fight for humanity, to endure without compromise, and to hold the line even when all else faltered. For all the alien horrors that threatened mankind, none were as insidious or as destructive as chaos. From the Eye of Terror, traitor legions and demonic hosts spilled forth in endless waves, each seeking to break the Imperium apart. Against this eternal darkness, the Salamanders fought with the same flame they had used against Xenos and Orcs. But against chaos, the flame burned with a particular fury. For the Salamanders, treachery was the wound that had nearly destroyed them at Isstvan V, and every battle against the traitor legions was an act of vengeance as much as duty. Most of the infamous clashes came in the aftermath of the 13th Black Crusade, when the galaxy itself was torn apart by Abaddon's assault. Among the countless worlds that fell into ruin was Armageddon Secundus, where demonic corruption seeped into the earth and sky. Entire hives twisted into grotesque reflections of the war, and half the planet became a nightmare realm ruled by the blood god's servants. At its heart, a ritual sought to summon Angron, the demon primarch of the World Eaters, to manifest fully into reality once again. It was here that the Salamanders deployed, leading strike forces into the broken landscape alongside Imperial Guard regiments and other chapters. The fighting was apocalyptic. Demon engines prowled the ruins, their brass hides steaming with gore, while cultists swarmed in maddened hordes. The Salamanders advanced through this inferno with bolter and flame, cleansing entire districts block by block. Their discipline and compassion shone even amidst this madness. Mortal soldiers who faltered in terror were steadied by the calm presence of green-armoured giants, who fought not only beside them, but for them. The climax came when Salamander's elite stormed the ritual site itself, a colossal altar of blood and bone pulsed with unnatural power, and the air itself rippled with Angron's imminent arrival. Salamander's Terminators, armed with thunder hammers and storm shields, smashed their way through the ritual guard while squads with flamers and melters incinerated the cultists powering the rite. As the warp tore open above them, the Salamanders hurled themselves at the ritual engines, bringing them down in a storm of fire. The summoning collapsed, Angron's screams of rage echoing as the portal imploded. The world was scarred forever, but humanity had been spared a fate too terrible to imagine. This was only one war in an endless litany. Across the millennia, Salamander's companies found themselves fighting chaos again and again. Not only the great crusades of traitor primarchs, but also the countless smaller rebellions and heresies that festered across the Imperium. Each time, their ethos of guardianship set them apart. In the Casfasare rebellion, chaos cults aligned with the Black Legion seized control of entire sectors, plunging worlds into anarchy. While other chapters launched decapitation strikes, the Salamanders waged a campaign of liberation. They fought not only to crush the cult leaders, but to shield the enslaved populations caught in the uprising. On the high world of Amandra, Salamander's squads fought street by street, shielding columns of refugees as artillery rained down. Their restraint and resolve ensured that when the cult was finally broken, millions of civilians were still alive to be reclaimed by the Imperium. Another grim tale comes from Yibranus, a world stricken by plague. Death Guard warbands had seeded the planet with contagions that reduced entire cities to pits of rot. Salamander's strike forces deployed into this nightmare, sealing their armour against the corruption and advancing with flame and melter into the heart of the infection. They torched plague hives and cut down the bloated forms of Nurgle's demons, their cleansing fire the only thing that could purify such foulness. It was not a clean war. The Salamanders lost many brothers to the touch of the warp's diseases, but their persistence ensured that Yibranus did not fall entirely into Nurgle's grasp. Survivors would forever remember the green armoured warriors who carried them through pestilent fog to safety. Time and again, the Salamanders proved that their flame was not only a weapon of destruction, but a force of salvation. To the cultist, to the demon, to the traitor, their fire was merciless. But to the innocent caught in the crossfire, that same fire was a shield, holding back the darkness. Their war against chaos was not without personal cost. Many Salamanders harboured bitter memories of the betrayal at Isstvan, and when they faced traitor legions on the battlefield, their fury burned hotter than any forge. Yet they never allowed vengeance to consume their compassion. When the Night Lords revelled in terror, the Salamanders stood as bulwarks of hope. Where the World Eaters sought only slaughter, the Salamanders fought to save. Their enemies were monsters not only because they had turned against the Emperor, but because they had turned against humanity itself. This philosophy carried into their command structure as well. Chapter Master Tushan embodied it throughout his tenure. Known as one of the most level-headed and humane leaders of any chapter, Tushan repeatedly chose strategies that prioritised the survival of civilians, even at the risk of Astartes' lives. His decisions during Chaos incursions, where he ordered entire companies to hold evacuation corridors while other forces pressed the attack, saved uncounted millions. Some Imperial commanders balked at these choices, viewing them as inefficient, but to the Salamanders, there was no greater victory than lives preserved. The Imperium's wars against Chaos are without end. New cults arise, new demon princes claw their way into reality, and new Black Crusades sweep across the stars. For the Salamanders, these are not just battles to be fought, they are trials by fire. Each time they descend into the heart of corruption, they do so as guardians, knowing the cost will be terrible, but unwilling to yield. It is this relentlessness that defines them. Where others see only damnation, the Salamanders see a chance to save what can be saved. Their fire burns not only to destroy, but to cleanse. Against the endless night of chaos, they are a flame that refuses to be extinguished. The birth of the Cicatrix Maledictum tore the galaxy in half. Where once the Astronomicon shone as a guiding light across the stars, now the Great Rift split the Imperium into two, drowning entire sectors in warp storms. Worlds were cut off, swallowed by madness, and countless billions vanished into the Immaterium's grip. The age of the Dark Imperium had begun. For the Salamanders, the opening of the rift was both catastrophe and calling. Their homeworld of Nocturne, already battered by its unstable orbit around Prometheus, trembled under apocalyptic storms of warp energy. Entire tribes believed the end had come, fire and shadow spilling across the volcanic plains. But the Salamanders did not abandon their people. They stood firm, shielding Nocturne settlements from rampaging demons that clawed into real space, fighting through eruptions and earthquakes to protect those who had always been their charge. Nocturne endured, because the Salamanders endured with it. At the same time, the galaxy cried out for aid. Rabuti Gilliman, returned to life by the artifice of Belisarius Kul and the will of the Eldar, launched the Indomitus Crusade, the largest mobilisation of Imperial forces since the Great Crusade itself. The Salamanders were among the chapters to heed the call. From Prometheus, they dispatched strike forces across the breadth of the Imperium, deploying to war zones where the fire of humanity gutted weakest. In these campaigns, their creed once more set them apart. On the world of Feldros, Salamanders fought alongside other chapters to stem the tide of demonic incursion. While their allies pressed for swift eradication of enemy strongholds, the Salamanders refused to abandon the hive clusters still filled with civilians. They fought a delaying battle across burning streets, their flamers roaring as they carved evacuation routes through the press of cultists and demons. Though the campaign cost them dearly, tens of thousands were saved from the warp's grasp. Elsewhere, on the planet Lagros, the Salamanders faced one of their most brutal foes, Kharn the Betrayer, the infamous champion of Khorne. The warband of the World Eaters had descended in fury, their berserkers carving a path of carnage through Imperial defenders. Chapter Master Tushan led his warriors in the counterstrike. It was not the first time he had faced the horrors of chaos, but against Kharn's madness, the Salamanders needed every ounce of discipline and resolve. Reports tell of entire companies engaging in desperate street-to-street fighting, their thunder hammers and flamers clashing with chain axes and gore-slick blades. Tushan himself confronted Kharn in battle, hammer against axe, their duel shaking the foundations of the Hive City. Though Kharn ultimately escaped, the Salamanders had driven back the World Eaters and saved Lagros from complete annihilation. The Indomitus Crusade stretched across centuries, and the Salamanders' contribution was constant. They did not command vast fleets or armies. Their numbers were modest compared to the titans like Ultramarines or Imperial Fists, but wherever they were deployed, they became the linchpin around which defences rallied. Their mastery of rearguard action, their determination to buy time for evacuations, and their reputation for never abandoning allies made them indispensable. To Astra Militarum regiments, the arrival of Salamanders in their war zone meant hope. The arrival of the Primera Space Marines, crafted by Call as part of Guilliman's grand strategy, brought change to every chapter. For the Salamanders, the integration of these new warriors was not without challenge. The Primeras were larger, faster, and more genetically stable than their firstborn predecessors. Yet many came from beyond Nocturne, strangers to the tribes and traditions of the Promethean Cult. At first, some within the chapter questioned whether these new brothers could truly embody Vulkan's creed. But time and war forged bonds. The Primeras who fought alongside their Salamander kin saw firsthand the compassion that defined the chapter. They learned the traditions of the Forge, the trials of fire, and the duty of protection that bound every Salamander to his people. In turn, their strength and resilience bolstered the chapter at a time when the Imperium needed every warrior it could muster. Over time, the lines blurred. Primaris and Firstborn were all brothers, and all were sons of Vulkan. As the Imperium fractured into the Imperium Sanctus and the Imperium Nihilus, Salamander companies were deployed to both sides of the rift. Their fleets travelled through the perilous warp routes, often arriving alone and unsupported in war zones cut off for decades. In such theatres, their ethos shone brightest. On worlds abandoned by the Administratum, where Imperial Guard commanders had long given up hope for reinforcement, the sudden arrival of green armoured giants who fought not only to kill but to save was nothing short of miraculous. One such tale comes from the world of Zero, where Alpha Legion agents had infiltrated the ruling council and turned the population against itself. Civil war erupted, chaos cults spread through the underhives, and demons clawed into the streets. Salamander strike teams deployed into the heart of the rebellion, rooting out traitor leaders while holding evacuation corridors for terrified citizens. Entire populations were carried to orbit under their protection, saved from a fate of eternal corruption. The people of Zero would later name the Salamanders the Unbound Flame, a title that spread across nearby sectors as a testimony to their deeds. In the Dark Millennium, the Salamanders' compassion sometimes drew criticism from Imperial commanders. To some, their insistence on saving civilians was a liability, a distraction from strategic objectives. But Tushan and his successors never wavered. They had seen too many wars where lives were squandered for expedience, too many worlds where the Imperium demanded sacrifice but gave nothing in return. The Salamanders fought not only for the Imperium, but for the people who made it worth saving. The Indomitus Crusade continues, for the galaxy remains divided and aflame. The Great Rift has not closed, and the threats of Chaos, Tyranids, Orcs, and Necrons grow greater with each passing century. But through it all, the Salamanders remain what they have always been, guardians standing in the breach. Their fire does not falter. Whether against the Warp's demons, the hunger of the swarm, or the silence of the tomb, they carry their creed unchanged, that every human life has value, and that their strength exists to protect it. In the darkest age humanity has ever known, where even hope seems a dangerous luxury, the Salamander's flame still burns. It may not be a flame large enough to light the whole galaxy, but to those who stand in its glow, to the soldiers, the refugees, the ordinary men and women who survive because of them, it is a fire bright enough to banish the night. Among the Salamanders, the deeds of the present are only half the tale. The other half burns in legend, the myths of their Primarch, the mysteries of his disappearance, and the sacred quest that has endured for 10,000 years. These stories are not idle fables. They are the heartbeat of the chapter, the unbroken promise that their father will one day return. Central to these beliefs are the artifacts of Vulkan, 9 relics scattered across the stars, each said to have been forged by the Primarch's own hands. Together, they form a trial for his sons. If all 9 were recovered, Vulkan himself shall return to lead them once more. Whether this is prophecy, oath, or myth matters little to the Salamanders. They believe it, utterly and without compromise. At the heart of this quest is the Forge Father, the title given to the wandering champion who carries the burden of recovering relics. The Forge Father is chosen from among the most devoted of the Salamanders, a warrior smith of great renown, entrusted to leave the chapter's halls and walk the stars alone. His duty is endless, to hunt for the relics, to reclaim what was lost, and to carry the promise of Vulkan's return into every battle he fights. To the Salamanders, the Forge Father is both smith and prophet, a living link between their chapter and the father who has never truly left them. The relics themselves are the stuff of saga. Among them is the Spear of Vulkan, a weapon said to burn with the fury of a star, its haft engraved with runes of fire that blaze in battle. The gauntlets of the Forge, a masterwork of such craft that even the greatest artificers of Mars cannot match its precision. The obsidian cloak, woven of drake hide and unknown metals, is said to render its bearer unbreakable in the heart of the flame. Each relic is not merely a weapon, but a symbol, a fragment of their Primarch's lost soul, carried forward into the wars of the present. The Salamander's annals are filled with tales of the Forge Fathers who have borne this burden. Some relics are found on forgotten battlefields, claimed from the hands of traitors who sought to corrupt them. Others vanished, lost to the void, their quests unfinished but not forgotten. For in the Promethean Creed, no quest is ever truly abandoned. Every Forge Father walks the same road, each step part of the same eternal journey. Of Vulkan himself, the myths are more complex. He is not counted among the dead, nor entombed like Dawn or Gilliman once were. Instead, he is spoken of as a perpetual, a being who cannot truly die. The Salamanders tell of how he endured capture and torment at the hands of the Night Haunter, of how he suffered death after death only to rise again, unbroken. To his sons, these are not just stories of survival, they are proof. Proof that their father yet lives, somewhere in the galaxy, awaiting the day when his hammer will once again sound upon the anvil of war. Some among the Imperium scoff at these beliefs, whispering that they are superstition, the desperate hope of a chapter scarred by loss. But among the Salamanders, the myths are more real than iron. For them, Vulkan walks still. He is the flame that never dies, the guardian who has not abandoned his children. Whether they fight tyrannid swarms, orc hordes, or the undying Necrons, the Salamanders fight as though their Primarch watches from just beyond the firefight, guiding their hands. The rituals of the chapter keep this faith alive. At the start of each campaign, a Salamander will inscribe his armour with the runes of the Forge, invoking Vulkan's name. Before every great battle, prayers are offered not only to the Emperor, but to the Father who showed them how to wield their strength with compassion. In the forged chapels of Prometheus, the recovered relics are enshrined in flame-lit vaults, their power a constant reminder that the quest is not yet finished. There are whispers too, of Vulkan's shadow moving through the galaxy even now. Refugees speak of a towering figure clad in blackened armour, appearing in the darkest moments of war, his hammer striking down foes before vanishing once more. In the fires of a demon world, some claim to have seen him walking unscathed. In the depths of a Necron tomb, others tell of a giant who fought alone for days, holding back deathless warriors until Imperial reinforcements could arrive. Whether truth or myth, the Salamanders hear these tales and nod, for to them such things are only natural. Their father is eternal, he will return. The legends are more than comfort, they are duty. Every Salamander who takes the oath of the Forge knows he does not fight for himself alone. He fights for Nocturne, for humanity, and for Vulkan, who one day will stand among them again. Each act of compassion, each battle fought to protect the weak, is part of that promise. For when Vulkan returns, his sons intend to stand before him not as broken survivors, but as true heirs, warriors worthy of their father's eternal flame. Thus the Salamanders fight on, their present bound to their past, their battles wage as much in faith as in fire. The relics remain scattered, the Forge Father still walks his lonely road, Vulkan's return is still awaited, yet to the Salamanders, this is not cause for despair, it is hope. Hope that even in a galaxy drowning in darkness, there is still a fire that cannot be extinguished. And so, when the Salamanders march into battle, they carry not only bolter and flamer, but legend itself. Each warrior is a living oath, each company a testament, each relic a spark of their father's soul. They are more than a chapter, they are the keepers of Vulkan's promise, that in the end, fire endures, and through it, humanity will endure as well. In the 42nd millennium, the Imperium staggers under the weight of its own survival. The galaxy is split by the Great Rift, and entire sectors are lost to warp storms and Xenos incursions. Yet amid this darkness, the Salamanders endure. Though their numbers are modest compared to some of their brother chapters, they remain one of the most steadfast defenders of mankind. Their fire has not dimmed, it burns as fiercely today as it did on the blackened plains of Isstvan. The chapter still recruits from the volcanic world of Nocturne, where the 7 great tribes provide the lifeblood of their ranks. Aspirants undergo the brutal trials of fire, enduring not only the genetic trials of transformation into Astartes, but also the cultural expectations of their people. Strength alone is never enough. The Salamanders demand compassion, courage, and the willingness to sacrifice for others. A warrior who cannot carry his brother to safety, who cannot shield the weak in the face of danger, is deemed unworthy of Vulkan's legacy. Their fortress monastery on Prometheus, Nocturne's moon, remains the heart of the chapter. Here, forges burn ceaselessly, producing weapons and armour of peerless craftsmanship. Salamander's artisans are famed throughout the Imperium for their work. Mastercrafted bolters engraved with runes of fire, thunder hammers balanced with perfect precision, and suits of Terminator armour passed down as relics from generation to generation. These creations are not mere tools, they are extensions of the chapter's creed, each one a reminder that every weapon carries responsibility. Unlike most chapters, the Salamanders still live closely among their people. Off campaign, they return to the settlements of Nocturne, walking the same streets and working the same forges as the mortals who revere them. This bond is more than symbolic, it ensures the Salamanders never forget why they fight. They are not lords ruling from distant heights, but guardians, protectors, and kin. Nocturne's people see them not as distant demigods but as family, giants who share their hardships and stand ready to defend them. The Salamanders' way of war has changed little since their founding. They still prefer short-ranged engagements, where their flamers, melters and bolters can unleash maximum devastation. They move methodically, enduring fire that would cripple other chapters, and break their enemies with relentless hammering assaults. Their patience, their refusal to yield to haste, has earned them both admiration and frustration from allies. To some, their progress is too slow. To the Salamanders, it is the only way. Steady, unstoppable, like the advance of flowing magma. Their compassion continues to define them in the age of the Dark Imperium. Even as the galaxy burns, they refuse to abandon civilians. Time and again, Salamanders' companies have fought on past the point of reason, holding evacuation corridors, shielding refugees, and ensuring that transports are filled before withdrawing. On the world of Caradax, they defended orbital lifts against endless Tyranid swarms, fighting long after their ammunition ran low, simply to buy another hour for terrified colonists to escape. Few chapters would risk such losses for civilians. For the Salamanders, it was never a choice, it was duty. The Salamanders also continue their role as symbols of hope among Imperial forces. Guardsmen who fight alongside them record tales of warriors who would not abandon them, who carried wounded soldiers to safety, who fought back to back with mortal men in trenches filled with fire. In an Imperium where most see the common soldier as expendable, the Salamanders' presence is transformative. Their arrival on a battlefield brings not just strength, but morale, the belief that survival is possible, even in the darkest of wars. The Primaris Marines, introduced during the Indomitus Crusade, have further bolstered the chapter. At first, there was unease. Many of the Primaris hailed from outside Nocturne, and their sheer size and speed set them apart from the firstborn brothers they joined. But in time, they too embraced the Promethean creed, learning the traditions of the Forge and the duty of guardianship. Today, Salamanders Primaris fight shoulder to shoulder with their firstborn kin, their green armour a symbol of unity. Together, they have brought renewed strength to a chapter that has long been limited in numbers. Modern campaigns continue to test them. Against the Alpha Legion, the Salamanders fought in shadow wars of sabotage and deceit, countering the Hydra's plots with the steady light of their fire. On Zero, they earn renown as the Unbound Flame, rescuing entire populations from heresy and demonic corruption. Against the Tyranids, they remain relentless, burning nests and cutting swarms apart in disciplined strikes. Against the Necrons, They endure battles of attrition, wielding melter fire against enemies who will not die. And against chaos, they continue to repay Isstvan's betrayal with every hammer blow and every cleansing flame. Leadership remains strong under the legacy of Chapter Master Tashan, whose long years of service embodied the Salamanders' ideals. Known as one of the most humane commanders in the Imperium, his decisions consistently prioritise the preservation of life. Though successors now carry his mantle, Tashan's spirit lingers in every choice the Chapter makes. The Salamanders have not swayed from their path, even as the Imperium around them has grown more brutal and uncompromising. Their battle cry still echoes across the stars. Into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war. It is more than a phrase, it is their essence. The Salamanders see themselves as weapons forged in the crucible of war, hammered into strength by their loss, and tempered by compassion. To carry their flame into battle is to carry Vulkan's legacy, unbroken even after 10,000 years. In the current age, the Salamanders stand as paradoxes. They are warriors of unmatched ferocity, whose flames can reduce armies to ash. Yet they are also saviours, who bend their might to shield those too weak to defend themselves. They are relentless executioners of the Emperor's foes, yet patient teachers and protectors of Nocturne's tribes. They are feared by enemies, revered by allies, and loved, truly loved, by the people they defend. The galaxy has grown darker than ever before. Whole sectors are consumed by the warp. Hive fleets advance, undying legions awake, and Chaos Primarchs return to lead their hosts. In such a time, mercy is rare, but the Salamanders still offer it. Their fire still burns, not only as a weapon of destruction, but as a beacon of hope. For every refugee lifted to safety, for every guardsman shielded from a hail of enemy fire, for every child of Nocturne saved from the jaws of a volcanic beast, the Salamanders prove that their creed is not just words. It is a living flame, one that endures, one that inspires, one that carries mankind forward even when the galaxy itself seems intent on consuming it. The Salamanders of today remain what they have always been, the keepers of the flame, guardians of humanity, and living proof that compassion and strength are not opposites, but one and the same. In their fire, there is destruction, but in their fire, there is also salvation. You have received the transmission of Dominicimo Voxlore. The saga of the Salamanders endures, written in fire, tempered on the anvil, and carried forward by warriors who guard humanity even when all else is lost. Mark your allegiance, strike the seal of subscription, and join the forge of those who keep the Emperor's flame alive. Until the next broadcast, hold fast to your duty, for the galaxy offers no mercy, only the strength we forge together. This is Dominicimo, and this channel carries the lore of the Salamanders.